On my son's birthday, he threw it in my face. The best gift for me would be if you disappeared from my life forever. I smiled, left silently, and left him to celebrate. An hour later, the police arrived, surrounded my yard, and arrested my son. You won't believe what happened next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The chocolate birthday cake balanced precariously in my left hand as I fumbled for the back door handle. 28 candles waited in the kitchen drawer. But first, I wanted to surprise Brandon with this homemade masterpiece. The wrapped gift tucked under my right arm contained the vintage watch he'd admired months ago. A family heirloom from his grandfather. Laughter drifted through the glass door. My son's voice mixed with others in animated conversation. The April evening air carried the scent of barbecued burgers and beer. Perfect weather for his 28th birthday celebration. I paused at the door, listening to make sure I wouldn't interrupt anything important. Through the glass, I could see Brandon standing near the grill with Mike and Jason, his usual crew. Samantha sat at the patio table, scrolling through her phone while other guests mingled around the yard. Man, your dad really went all out for this party. Mike's voice carried clearly. New sound system, premium beer, even hired that catering service for appetizers. Brandon took a long swig from his bottle. Yeah, well, he's trying to buy my affection, as usual. Thinks money solves everything. I froze. Cake still balanced in my hands. The gift suddenly felt heavier under my arm. At least he cares, Jason chimed in. My old man hasn't called me in 6 months. Trust me, you're better off. Brandon's laugh held no warmth. Robert's always breathing down my neck about getting a job, moving out, taking responsibility, like he doesn't understand that the economy sucks right now. My fingers tightened around the cake plate. Through the door, I watched my son gesture dismissively with his beer bottle. Honestly, guys, the best gift for me would be if the old man finally disappeared from my life forever. I'm tired of his lectures and control. The words hit like a physical blow. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the cake. 28 years of birthdays, Christmas mornings, baseball games, bedtime stories. All reduced to this moment of casual cruelty. Who would have thought your father was so pushy? Mike agreed, raising his bottle in mock salute. Jason snorted. Dude's probably got your whole life planned out in some spreadsheet. That's what engineers do. Right, exactly. Everything has to be his way or no way. Brandon turned toward the house, and I quickly stepped aside, pressing myself against the wall. Sometimes I wish he'd just, I don't know, find somewhere else to be permanently. The gift slipped from under my arm, landing softly on the doormat. I caught it just as my legs threatened to give out. The watch inside my father's watch, passed down through 3 generations. Suddenly seemed worthless. You could always move out, Samantha called from the table, not looking up from her phone. With what money? He controls everything. Acts like I'm still 12 years old. Brandon drained his beer and tossed the empty bottle into a nearby trash can. But hey, at least the free rent's decent. More laughter erupted from the group. I stood frozen, a 62-year-old man holding a birthday cake for someone who wished I'd disappear forever. The candles in the kitchen seemed pointless now. What was I celebrating? My hands began to shake. The cake wobbled dangerously as memories flooded back. Brandon's graduation party, where he'd introduced me as the guy who pays for everything. The family dinner where he'd rolled his eyes at every story I told. The Christmas morning when he'd barely looked up from his phone while opening gifts. 28 years. Had I been this blind the entire time? I leaned against the door frame, struggling to process what I just heard. Inside the house, my kitchen waited with birthday decorations I'd hung this morning. The dining room table held wrapped presents I'd spent weeks selecting. Everything I'd done, everything I'd planned, reduced to unwanted control and pushy interference. The party continued without any knowledge of my presence. Brandon had moved closer to the grill, flipping burgers while Mike told some story that had everyone laughing. They looked so comfortable, so natural in their mockery of the man who provided the house, the food, the very ground they stood on. I backed away from the door, cake still trembling in my grip. The wrapped watch felt like dead weight in my other hand. Through the glass, I could see my son living his truth. Enjoying a party funded by someone he wished would disappear. My chest tightened with something beyond hurt, something colder, more calculating. I thought about the mortgage I'd been paying for 5 years since buying this house. The utilities, the insurance, the property taxes, the food in the refrigerator, the car in the driveway that Brandon drove without permission, everything he took for granted while wishing I'd vanished from his life. I turned toward the kitchen, my mind beginning to work differently. If Brandon wanted me gone so badly, perhaps it was time to grant his birthday wish, but not in the way he expected. The cake could wait. The candles could wait. First, I needed to make some phone calls. 10 minutes had passed since I'd retreated to the kitchen. The birthday cake sat abandoned on the counter, frosting slightly melted from my trembling hands. I'd paced between the refrigerator and the window, watching my son continue his celebration while processing the devastation of his words. Now I walked back through the sliding door with measured steps. No cake, no gift, no pretense of celebration. Just a father demanding answers from his ungrateful son. Brandon stood exactly where I'd left him, beer bottle raised in animated conversation with Mike and Jason. The barbecue smoke drifted lazily between us as I approached their circle. Several guests glanced my way, probably expecting another fatherly interruption about turning down the music or cleaning up their mess. Brandon. My voice cut through their laughter. Can we talk privately? He turned with the casual indifference of someone who'd never faced real consequences, the same expression he'd worn when I'd found him using my credit card for online purchases. Or when neighbors complained about parties while I was working late shifts. Dad, whatever you heard, it's true. He shrugged, not even bothering to lower his voice. You're interfering with my life, and everyone here knows it. The directness stunned me. No shame, no attempt at explanation, just brutal honesty delivered with the confidence of someone who'd never been held accountable. How can you say that after everything I've done for you? Nobody asked you to. That was your choice to support me. Brandon took another swig of beer, his friends nodding approvingly. You act like I owe you something for decisions you made. Mike stepped closer to Brandon's shoulder. Dude's got a point, Mr. Davis. Parents choose to have kids. The casual cruelty of it hit harder than Brandon's words. Here was my son's support system, enabling his disrespect with philosophical justifications. I glanced around the backyard. My backyard paid for with my income maintained with my labor. And saw guests beginning to notice our conversation. 28 years. My voice remained steady despite the rage building in my chest. 28 years of providing everything you needed. And I never asked for any of it. Brandon's voice rose, emboldened by the audience. You want gratitude for stuff I never requested. That's your problem, not mine. Jason laughed, the sound sharp in the evening air. Boomer mentality right there. I sacrificed, so you owe me. Several guests had stopped their own conversations now, forming a loose circle around our confrontation. Some looked uncomfortable, but none intervened. This was entertainment to them, a family drama unfolding at a party they'd remember for weeks. So when you told your friends you wished I'd disappear forever, you meant that? Brandon's eyes flickered with surprise. The first crack in his casual facade. He hadn't expected me to know the exact words, but the moment passed quickly, replaced by defensive aggression. Yeah, I meant it. You hover, you lecture, you make everything about your expectations. He gestured with his beer bottle, droplets splashing onto the patio stones. Maybe if you found your own life instead of trying to control mine, we'd both be happier. The crowd had grown larger now. Conversations throughout the backyard had quieted as more guests tuned into our public confrontation. I could feel their eyes on me. The controlling father, the overbearing parent who couldn't let his adult son live freely. Your own house, your own food, your own car. Each word came out measured, deliberate, all provided by someone you wish would disappear. That's right, Brandon's smile held no warmth. And when you do finally move on, I'll miss the free rent for about 5 minutes. Then I'll figure something else out. Samantha giggled from the patio table, her attention finally drawn from her phone. Brandon, you're terrible. But she said it like a compliment, like his callousness was charming rather than devastating. The sound of her amusement mixed with the approving chuckles from Mike and Jason, creating a soundtrack of mockery around my humiliation. I stood there surrounded by people celebrating my son's cruelty. 28 years of midnight feedings, school projects, driving lessons, college tuition all reduced to unwanted interference in front of an audience that found our family's destruction amusing. The party continued around us. Music still playing, barbecue still smoking, guests still drinking my beer and eating my food, while witnessing the complete disintegration of any respect between father and son. I turned away from the circle of faces, some smirking, others uncomfortably averting their eyes. Brandon's laughter followed me as I walked toward the house, but something had shifted in those final moments. The hurt was crystallizing into something colder, more calculating. He wanted me gone. That could be arranged, but not in the way he expected. The stairs creaked under my weight as I climbed to the second floor, each step taking me further from the laughter that still echoed through the house. My bedroom door closed with a soft click, finally separating me from the celebration of my own humiliation. I stood motionless for a moment, letting the silence wash over me. The party sounds filtered through the walls. Demuted conversations, clinking bottles, Brandon's voice cutting through it all with another joke at my expense. Through the window, I could see guests moving around the backyard, their shadows dancing across the patio stones in the evening light. The mirror above my dresser reflected a man I barely recognized. When had I become this person, this doormat who absorbed insults with quiet dignity, who enabled disrespect by continuing to provide for someone who wished me dead? My reflection stared back with hollow eyes, and suddenly the memories came flooding back. Last spring's car incident flashed through my mind with painful clarity. Brandon had dragged me to 3 different dealerships, demanding I co-sign for vehicles he couldn't afford. When I'd suggested something more reasonable, he'd turned to the salesman with theatrical embarrassment. Sorry about my dad. He doesn't understand that image matters in my field. The salesman had looked uncomfortable, but Brandon had continued with cruel precision. He thinks driving a decent car is showing off. That's what happens when you settle for mediocrity your whole life. I stood there, checkbook in hand, absorbing the public humiliation while still preparing to help him get transportation he needed. The used Honda we'd finally settled on had cost me $15,000. He'd complained about it for months. Another memory surfaced unbidden. The Christmas dinner where I'd invited his friends, hoping to build bridges. I'd spent days preparing, wanting to show Brandon's social circle that his father wasn't the controlling ogre he'd apparently described. Actually, Mr. Davis, Brandon tells us you're pretty strict about everything, Mike had said over dessert, his tone carrying barely concealed mockery. Must be tough having someone monitoring your every move. Brandon had laughed, raising his wine glass. You have no idea. Dad thinks he knows what's best for everyone. I'd sat at the head of my own table, serving wine I'd paid for to people who were openly mocking me while my son orchestrated the whole performance. The worst part, I'd kept smiling, kept playing the good host, kept enabling the very behavior that was destroying any possibility of respect between us. But tonight had been different. Tonight, Brandon had finally said what he really thought, and something inside me had shifted permanently. I walked to the window and looked down at the backyard. There he was, animated and gesturing with a fresh beer, probably recounting his latest victory over the old man. His friends clustered around him like disciples, hanging on every word of his performance. They were all living in my house, eating my food, drinking my alcohol, celebrating my public defeat. How many years had I been financing my own disrespect? The engineering part of my mind began to engage. The same analytical process I'd used to solve complex problems for 3 decades. Variables, constraints, desired outcomes. Brandon wanted me gone from his life. I wanted respect, or at least an end to active contempt. The current approach, patience, generosity, hoping for eventual gratitude. D had failed completely. Time for a different methodology. I turned away from the window and faced myself in the mirror again. This time I saw something different. Not a victim, not a doormat, but a man with resources, options, and the intelligence to use them effectively. Brandon was 28 years old and had never held a real job. He had no savings, no credit history, no practical life skills beyond consuming what others provided. His entire lifestyle depended on my continued willingness to subsidize his comfort while he publicly mocked my existence. What would happen if that subsidy simply disappeared? The thought sent a cold clarity through my system. I owned this house outright. Every utility bill, every insurance payment, every property tax assessment came from my accounts. The refrigerator he raided, the internet he used, the electricity that powered his late-night gaming sessions. All mine. If Brandon truly wanted me gone from his life, perhaps it was time to grant that wish, but on my terms, not his. I moved toward the door, my hand resting on the handle. The party continued below, oblivious to the shift that had just occurred in the man who made it all possible. Brandon was about to learn the difference between independence and abandonment, between freedom and responsibility. He'd asked for space from his father's influence. Soon he'd have all the space he could handle. 25 minutes had passed since I'd walked away from that circle of mockery. Now I descended the stairs with measured steps, each one taking me closer to a confrontation that would reshape the dynamics of this house permanently. The back door opened to the same scene I'd left, music pumping from the portable speakers. Guests clustered around the patio with drinks. Brandon holding court near the barbecue grill. But something fundamental had changed. Not in the party, but in me. I walked directly across the yard toward the DJ table, where someone had set up the sound system. Conversations continued around me, most guests unaware that the man who owned everything they were enjoying had just made a decision that would alter their evening considerably. The wireless microphone sat next to the speakers, exactly where I'd hoped to find it. I picked it up with the same calm precision I'd once used to present engineering solutions to corporate boards. The music continued for another moment before I located the volume control. Silence fell across the backyard like a curtain dropping. The party is over. My voice carried clearly through the speakers to every corner of my property. I'm asking everyone to leave my property now. The words landed with the impact of a physical blow. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Beer bottles paused halfway to lips. Even the most intoxicated guests understood that something significant had just occurred. Brandon's face went through a rapid sequence of emotions. Surprise, embarrassment, then settling into the familiar arrogance that had defined our relationship for years. Nobody's going anywhere. He stepped forward, addressing the crowd rather than me. This is my party, and you're all welcome to stay as long as you want. Mike immediately moved to Brandon's side, his support as predictable as sunrise. Robert, don't ruin the kid's celebration. It's his birthday. This is my property. I replied into the microphone, my voice steady and factual. I have the legal right to decide who stays and who leaves. Jason laughed, the same dismissive sound I'd heard earlier. Come on, Mr. Davis, don't be dramatic. We're not hurting anything. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, sensing the family conflict escalating beyond normal boundaries. But Brandon's inner circle rallied around him with the loyalty of people who had never faced real consequences for their actions. "Dad, put the microphone down and stop embarrassing yourself." Brandon's voice carried the condescending tone he'd perfected over years of taking my support for granted. "These are my friends. This is my party and you're acting like a crazy person." The microphone amplified my response to every guest scattered across the yard. "I own this house. I pay the mortgage, the utilities, the insurance, and the property taxes. This is not your property, Brandon. It's mine. So what? You've been supporting me for years. That's what parents do." He gestured dismissively, playing to his audience. "You can't just kick people out because you're having some kind of breakdown." Samantha giggled from her position at the patio table, apparently finding our family's legal dispute entertaining. Several other guests murmured among themselves, but none moved toward the exit. "Actually, I can." The microphone ensured my words reached everyone clearly. "Any property owner has the right to ask people to leave. If they refuse, it becomes trespassing." The casual certainty in my voice seemed to penetrate even Brandon's alcohol-fueled confidence. He looked around at his friends, seeking the same support that had emboldened him during our earlier confrontation. "You're not serious," Mike said, but his tone had lost some of its earlier dismissiveness. "You wouldn't actually call the cops on your own son's birthday party. Watch me." I set the microphone down on the table and turned toward the house. "You have 5 minutes to leave voluntarily. After that, the police will remove you as trespassers." Brandon's voice rose behind me. No longer the controlled mockery earlier, but something approaching panic. "Dad, you can't do this. These people are my friends." I paused at the back door and looked over the gathering one final time. 30 years of hosting Brandon's friends, buying food for his parties, cleaning up the mess afterward, and enduring their casual disrespect in my own backyard. "You wanted me gone from your life," I said, my voice carrying without amplification. "This is how that works. When I'm gone, my house goes with me." The door closed behind me with a soft click, muffling the eruption of voices that followed. Through the kitchen window, I could see guests looking toward the house uncertainly, some already moving toward the side gate. I walked to the wall phone and dialed 911. 25 minutes after my phone call, red and blue lights swept across the backyard like a lighthouse beam cutting through darkness. The party's casual atmosphere evaporated as guests noticed the patrol car pulling into my driveway. Officer James Miller appeared first through the side gate, his uniform and badge immediately commanding attention from every person on my property. His partner, Officer Linda Gark, OA, followed close behind, both carrying the unmistakable authority that comes with legal power. "Who called the police?" Officer Miller's voice carried the professional neutrality I'd expected from suburban law enforcement. "I did." I stepped forward from my position near the back door. "This is my property, and I asked these people to stop the party and leave. They refused." Miller nodded, pulling out a small notepad while surveying the crowd of guests who had suddenly become very interested in their drinks and conversations. The music had stopped completely, leaving only the sound of nervous laughter and whispered discussions. "Can you verify ownership of this property, sir?" I handed him my driver's license and property tax statement, documents I had retrieved while waiting for their arrival. 28 years of homeownership had taught me the importance of proper documentation. Officer Gar, a step toward the center of the patio, her voice cutting through the evening air with official clarity. "Everyone present must leave this private property immediately. The property owner has requested your departure, and continued presence constitutes trespassing." The reaction was immediate and varied. Several guests near the garden area quickly began gathering their belongings, clearly uncomfortable with police involvement in what they'd assumed was a simple family dispute. Others looked toward Brandon, seeking guidance from someone who had no legal authority to give it. "This isn't fair." Samantha's voice rose above the general murmur of confusion. "We had permission. Brandon invited us." "Ma'am, adult children living in their parents' homes do not have the legal right to authorize guests against the property owner's wishes." Garch replied with the patience of someone who'd handled similar situations countless times. Brandon stepped forward, his earlier confidence shaken but not entirely broken. "Officers, this is ridiculous. It's my birthday party and my father is just being vindictive." Miller turned his attention to my son with professional detachment. "Sir, family disputes don't change property law. If your father owns this property and wants guests to leave, they need to comply." I watched from my position near the house as the crowd began to thin. About half the guests had already started moving toward the side gate, clearly wanting no part of a police intervention. These were sensible people who understood that challenging law enforcement over a backyard party wasn't worth the potential consequences. But Brandon's core group remained defiant. Mike and Jason flanked him like bodyguards, their loyalty apparently stronger than their common sense. Samantha lingered nearby, still clutching her drink, as if the party might somehow continue. despite uniformed officers standing in the middle of the patio. How long do they have to leave? I asked Officer Miller, maintaining the same calm tone I'd used throughout the evening. We typically allow a reasonable amount of time for compliance, he replied, but continued refusal after official notification becomes a more serious matter. The implications hung in the air like smoke from the abandoned barbecue grill. Brandon's face showed the first real signs of uncertainty as he processed what more serious matter might mean in practical terms. "Dad, you can't actually have us arrested for having a party," he said, but the confidence that had carried him through our earlier confrontations had noticeably diminished. "I'm not having anyone arrested," I replied truthfully. "I'm simply exercising my legal rights as a property owner. What happens next depends entirely on whether people choose to respect those rights." Gurkai checked her watch and scanned the remaining guests. "Those who wish to leave voluntarily should do so now. Anyone still present in 5 minutes will be considered in violation of trespassing laws." The announcement triggered another wave of departures. Even some of Brandon's supporters began edging toward the gate, their loyalty tested by the prospect of actual legal consequences. The party that had started with 20 guests was rapidly shrinking to a stubborn core of perhaps 6 or 7 people. Brandon looked around at his dwindling support network, finally beginning to grasp the reality of his situation. But instead of backing down, he crossed his arms and planted his feet more firmly on my patio stones. "I live here," he announced to the officers. "This is my home, too." Officer Miller's patience had reached its professional limit. He stepped closer to Brandon, his hand moving toward the handcuffs on his belt with practiced efficiency. "Young man, you are breaking the law. This is your final opportunity to leave voluntarily." Brandon's response came with the same arrogance that had defined our relationship for years, but now it carried the weight of genuine legal consequences. "I'm not going anywhere. This is ridiculous. You can't arrest someone for being at their own house." "Actually, we can." Giessa moved to flank Brandon from the left, her positioning professional and deliberate. "You don't own this property, and you've been ordered to leave by the legal owner." The reality of his situation seemed to hit Brandon like cold water. His eyes darted between the two officers, then toward me standing near the back door, then to his remaining friends who watched in stunned silence. "Dad, tell them this is crazy. I live here." "You live here by my permission," I replied calmly. "Permission? I'm withdrawing." Miller stepped forward with the handcuffs visible. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." "Are you serious right now?" Brandon's voice cracked slightly, the first sign that his bravado was finally giving way to genuine fear. "You're actually going to arrest me. Turn around now." The moment stretched like a taut wire. I watched my son's face cycle through disbelief, anger, and finally a desperate kind of panic as he realized that 28 years of avoiding consequences had just come to an end. Brandon slowly turned around, his movement stiff with resentment. The click of handcuffs closing around his wrists echoed across the empty patio, with the finality of a closing door. "Brandon Davis, you're under arrest for criminal trespassing and failure to comply with a lawful order," Miller stated with the professional neutrality of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. Samantha gasped from her position near the abandoned BBQ grill. "This can't be happening. Robert, you can't let them arrest your own son." I met her gaze with the same calm I'd maintained throughout the evening. "I'm not letting them do anything." I called them specifically because Brandon refused to respect my property rights. As the officers began walking Brandon toward the side gate, he twisted around to face me. His expression transformed into something I'd never seen before. Genuine hatred mixed with disbelief. "Dad, I will never forgive you for this. You think you've won something, but you just made the biggest mistake of your life." The venom in his voice would have devastated me just hours earlier. Now it simply confirmed that my decision to take drastic action had been correct. A son who could speak to his father with such hatred while being arrested for trespassing on his father's property had lost any claim to family loyalty. "We'll see," I replied. Miller opened the rear door of the patrol car, his hand guiding Brandon's head as he climbed into the back seat. Through the window, I could see my son's face contorted with rage, his mouth moving in what I assumed were additional threats I was grateful not to hear. Mike stepped forward, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. "Officer, how long will he be held? When can we bail him out?" "That depends on the charges and the judge's decision," Garter replied. "Criminal trespassing can carry a sentence of up to 2 weeks in county jail, plus fines." 2 weeks. The number settled into my mind with perfect satisfaction. 2 weeks would give me adequate time to make the changes I'd been contemplating during my transformation upstairs. The patrol car's engines started and red and blue lights began rotating again as the vehicle backed out of my driveway. I watched from my position on the back porch as my son was driven away, officially in police custody, finally facing real consequences for his choices. Samantha stood crying near the abandoned party decorations, while Mike and Jason gathered empty bottles with the confused efficiency of people who didn't know what else to do. The party was over in every sense, and my backyard belonged to me again. Within minutes, even Brandon's closest supporters had gathered their belongings and left through the side gate. The music equipment sat silent, the BBQ grill cooling in the evening air, paper plates and plastic cups scattered across surfaces I'd be cleaning tomorrow. But tonight, I stood alone in my reclaimed space, listening to the silence that had replaced years of disrespectful noise. The real work was just beginning. The first morning without Brandon's presence felt like stepping into a different house entirely. Coffee brewed in absolute silence while I sat at the kitchen table, no longer listening for the sounds of complaints or demands echoing from upstairs. A quick phone call to the county clerk's office confirmed what Officer Gara had mentioned. Brandon would serve 14 days for criminal trespassing and disorderly conduct. His release date was scheduled for April 29th at 9 a.m. 14 days, exactly 2 weeks to implement the plan that had crystallized during those final moments of his arrest. Over the following days, I began working with the same methodical precision that had defined my engineering career. The first step involved gathering information about Brandon's actual situation versus the fantasy he'd been living. I pulled out financial records spanning the past 5 years, rent equivalent in our neighborhood, $2,800 monthly. Utilities averaged $350, food costs I'd covered, roughly $400 monthly. Insurance, maintenance, property taxes, and incidental expenses brought his true cost of living to approximately $4,200 per month, $50 annually. That's what supporting Brandon's unemployment had cost me, not counting the additional expenses for his parties, gas money, and various emergencies that required immediate financial intervention. During my research phase, I also investigated current real estate market conditions. Similar houses in our neighborhood were selling for between $820,000 and $880,000, depending on condition and exact location. Mine, meticulously maintained and recently updated, would likely command the higher end of that range. The memory that kept surfacing during those quiet planning sessions was last November's job fair incident. I'd driven Brandon to 3 different employment opportunities, waited patiently while he submitted applications, even coached him on interview techniques the night before. He'd return from each interview with elaborate explanations about why the positions weren't suitable. The manager seemed like a micromanager. The pay was insulting for someone with my potential. The commute would eat up half my salary and gas costs. Within a week, I discovered through a friend that Brandon had intentionally sabotaged each interview, arriving late, dressed inappropriately, and giving flippant answers designed to ensure rejection. When confronted, his response had been brutally honest. "Why would I take some minimum wage job when you provide everything I need here?" That conversation should have been the wake-up call. Instead, I'd absorbed his logic and continued enabling the very behavior that was destroying any possibility of mutual respect. By the end of the first week of his incarceration, my decision had crystallized completely. Brandon wanted me to disappear from his life. He'd stated this wish publicly, repeatedly, and with sufficient cruelty to demonstrate genuine intent. Very well, I would disappear, but not as the defeated father he expected to manipulate indefinitely. The house would be sold while he sat in county jail, blissfully unaware that his free ride was ending permanently. The proceeds would fund a comfortable retirement somewhere far from California. Somewhere Brandon would never think to look for a father he'd wished would vanish. I spent the second week researching retirement communities in different states, places where $850,000 could buy a modest home and provide years of peaceful independence. Arizona, Colorado, North Carolina, the states with reasonable costs of living and no connections to my current life. Brandon's threats during his arrest had made one thing perfectly clear. He viewed me as an obstacle to be overcome, not a father to be respected. His promise that I would regret enforcing boundaries was exactly the kind of manipulative language I'd been tolerating for years. But this time, there would be no backing down, no compromise, no gradual erosion of my resolve through emotional manipulation. The engineering approach to this problem was elegantly simple. Remove the variable causing system dysfunction. In this case, that variable was my continued financial support for someone who openly despised the person providing it. As Brandon's release date approached, I finalized my research and confirmed my decision. The real estate agent's business card sat next to my morning coffee, waiting for the phone call that would set everything in motion. 28 years of patient guidance, financial support, and unconditional love had produced nothing but entitlement, disrespect, and threats of retaliation when boundaries were finally enforced. Time to show Brandon what disappearing actually looked like. I reached for the phone to call Michelle Johnson, the real estate agent whose online reviews suggested she specialized in quick, efficient sales. Michelle Johnson's office occupied a corner suite in downtown San Jose, its windows offering views of the city that had been my home for 3 decades. Professional certificates lined the walls alongside photos of sold properties, creating an atmosphere of competence and success. "Mr. Davis, thank you for calling," she said, gesturing toward the chair across from her polished desk. "You mentioned needing to sell quickly. What's driving the timeline?" I settled into the leather chair, my property documents organized in a manila folder that reflected the same methodical approach I'd brought to every engineering project. Family circumstances, personal reasons that require immediate action. Her expression remained professionally neutral, a skill that had undoubtedly served her well in countless client interactions. I understand. Let me review your property details, and we can discuss realistic expectations. The property evaluation took approximately 40 minutes of market analysis, neighborhood comparison studies, and detailed discussions about pricing strategy. Michelle's expertise was evident in her systematic approach to determining optimal market positioning. Based on current market conditions and the property details you've provided, I'd recommend listing at $80,000-$50,000. At that price point, with proper staging and marketing, we should attract serious buyers within a week. Perfect. The timeline aligned exactly with my private deadline. Excellent. I'll agree to that price. I leaned forward slightly, maintaining the business-focused demeanor that had characterized our entire interaction. I'm prepared to offer you a significant bonus if the sale closes within 7 days. Her eyes brightened with the kind of professional enthusiasm that substantial financial incentives typically generate. How significant are we talking? $1,000 above your standard commission if we have a signed contract by next Tuesday. Mr. Davis, you have my complete attention and commitment. Let's visit the property this afternoon so I can conduct a proper evaluation. The drive to my house took 20 minutes through familiar neighborhoods that would soon become memories rather than daily scenery. Michelle followed in her own vehicle, her professional camera, equipment visible through the rear window. Walking through my home with someone evaluating its market value created an unexpectedly emotional experience. Every room held memories of Brandon's childhood, birthday parties, homework sessions. The gradual transformation from grateful child to entitled adult. The maintenance level is exceptional, Michelle observed, photographing the updated kitchen and recently refinished hardwood floors. This property will show beautifully. Have you considered professional staging? Whatever you recommend, cost isn't the primary concern. She moved through each room with practiced efficiency, noting architectural details, natural lighting, and the kinds of features that attract buyers in our competitive market. Her assessment confirmed what my research had suggested. The house was positioned perfectly for rapid sale. Honestly, Mr. Davis, properties in this condition don't stay on the market long. With the right marketing approach and competitive pricing, I'm confident we can have multiple offers by the weekend. Multiple offers meant potential bidding wars, which could drive the final price even higher than our listing target. Brandon's 2-week sentence was providing advantages I hadn't anticipated when this plan first crystallized. Back in her office, the contract negotiation proceeded with remarkable efficiency. Standard seller disclosure forms, marketing strategy agreements, and timeline specifications filled the afternoon with productive legal documentation. I'll have professional photographs taken tomorrow morning, Michelle explained while organizing the signed paperwork. Listing goes live Thursday, open house scheduled for Saturday and Sunday. Given the urgency and bonus structure, this property gets absolute priority in my schedule. The bonus arrangement was structured as performance-based compensation, entirely legal and professionally appropriate. $5,000 represented substantial motivation for an agent whose annual income depended on successful closings. Mr. Davis, I have to ask, are you planning to relocate? This seems like more than just downsizing, complete life change. I replied truthfully, though the full context would have shocked her professional composure. Sometimes circumstances require dramatic decisions. She nodded with the kind of understanding that suggested experience with clients undergoing major life transitions. Well, I'll make sure this transition proceeds as smoothly as possible. The signed contracts felt substantial in my hands as I prepared to leave her office. 7 days remained until Brandon's scheduled release, and the mechanism for his ultimate lesson in consequences was now legally documented and professionally managed. One more thing, I said, pausing at her office door. I may need to coordinate timing very precisely. Can you keep me updated on any interested buyers immediately? Absolutely. You'll have real-time updates on every showing, every inquiry, every offer. This is going to move fast. I walked to my car with the satisfaction of someone who had just converted years of planning into concrete action. The house that had sheltered Brandon's entitlement for 28 years would soon belong to strangers who actually appreciated having a place to call home. Now, I needed to learn exactly when Brandon would be released so I could time the final phase perfectly. The drive to Santa Clara County Jail took 30 minutes through morning traffic that gave me time to prepare for what would likely be my final interaction with any aspect of Brandon's current circumstances. The facility emerged from the industrial landscape like a concrete monument to consequences. Exactly what my son would soon understand intimately. Security procedures required identification, verification, metal detector screening, and visitor registration that transformed citizens into processed subjects within the institutional system. The efficiency impressed me with its methodical approach to human management. I need information about an inmate, I told the corrections officer at the visitor information desk, sliding my driver's license across the polished counter. Sergeant Davis D., no relation. Despite the shared surname, D reviewed my identification with the professional neutrality that characterized every aspect of this sterile environment. His uniform and badge represented authority that transcended personal feelings or family dynamics. Name of the inmate, Brandon Davis. He's serving 2 weeks for criminal trespassing. The sergeant's fingers moved across his computer keyboard with practiced efficiency, accessing databases that contained every detail of Brandon's current legal situation. The institutional system had reduced my son to a number, a cell assignment, and a release schedule. Brandon Davis, booked April 15th. His eyes scanned the monitor without emotion. Your son will be released April 29th at 9 Hodem. Perfect. The timing aligned exactly with my strategic requirements. Thank you for that information. I maintained the same professional tone that had characterized my entire interaction with this facility. Is there anything else I should know about the release process? Standard release procedures. He'll be processed out through this same building. Return personal effects. Given transportation voucher if requested. Sergeant Davis looked up from his screen with the kind of helpful efficiency that marked quality public service. Would you like to visit with him while you're here? The question hung in the air between us like smoke from an extinguished fire. Here was my opportunity to see Brandon face to face, to gauge his emotional state, perhaps even to prepare him for what awaited his return home. No, that won't be necessary. 4 words that severed whatever remained of traditional parental obligation. Sergeant Davis showed no reaction to my refusal. Deaf family dynamics weren't part of his professional concern, only procedural compliance and information distribution. Visiting hours are daily from 2 to 4 p.m. If you change your mind, he offered with the same neutral helpfulness he'd shown throughout our interaction. I appreciate the information, but I have everything I need. The conversation concluded with the institutional efficiency that had marked its beginning. No personal questions, no judgment about family relationships, no curiosity about my reasons for gathering release information without visiting my incarcerated son. Walking back through the security checkpoints felt like emerging from a controlled environment designed to strip away individual identity and personal choice. Brandon had spent 10 days in this system that reduced humans to numbers and schedules, learning what accountability actually meant in practical terms. The drive home provided time to calculate final timeline coordination. April 29th, 9:00 am. Brandon would be processed out of county jail, expecting to return to the house that had sheltered his entitlement for 28 years. Instead, he would discover that his father had finally taken his advice about disappearing from his life. Michelle's real estate expertise suggested the property would likely sell by the weekend, giving me several days to coordinate closing procedures with Brandon's release timing. The house that had enabled his disrespect would belong to strangers who appreciated having a place to call home. The engineering precision of this revenge plan satisfied every aspect of my methodical nature. Variables controlled, timeline synchronized, resources allocated efficiently, and desired outcome guaranteed through legal channels that Brandon himself had initiated. Back in my driveway, I sat in the car for a moment, contemplating the house that would soon cease to be my responsibility. Every mortgage payment, every utility bill, every maintenance expense had subsidized someone who wished I would disappear from his life forever. Tomorrow I would coordinate with Michelle about showing schedules and potential buyer interest. The institutional visit had confirmed that Brandon remained exactly where consequences had placed him, unaware that his father was implementing the ultimate lesson in gratitude and respect. By the time he walked out of county jail next Tuesday morning, the home he'd taken for granted would be an escrow to buyers who actually wanted to live there. My phone rang as I reached the front door. Michelle's name appeared on the caller ID, probably with updates about buyer interest in showing appointments. Michelle speaking, came the cheerful voice through my phone as I stepped through my front door for what would likely the last time as its owner. Robert Davis, you called. Wonderful news. The Garcia family has accepted our asking price. Full cash offer, no contingencies, closing tomorrow morning at 9:30. Perfect timing. Brandon would be released at 9, giving him just enough time to return home before discovering that home no longer existed in any meaningful sense. Excellent work, Michelle. That bonus is well earned. The next 24 hours compressed into a whirlwind of final arrangements that would have impressed any project manager. Moving trucks, documents signing, key transfers, and the careful coordination of a revenge plan. 2 weeks in the making. Carlos and Maria Garcia arrived with their 2 children and a moving truck filled with the hopeful energy that comes with starting fresh in a new home. Their excitement reminded me of my own feelings when I'd first bought this house 30 years ago, back when Brandon was still grateful for bedtime stories and birthday parties. Mr. Davis, thank you so much for accepting our offer quickly, Maria said as their kids ran through what had been Brandon's childhood home. We know you were in a hurry to sell. Life circumstances change rapidly sometimes. I handed Carlos the garage door opener and house keys, feeling the symbolic weight of transferring ownership to people who would actually appreciate living here. I do have one small favor to ask. Of course, anything. My son is traveling and may stop by tomorrow, not knowing about the sale. Could you give him this note? I handed Maria a sealed envelope with Brandon's name written in my careful engineering script. She accepted it with the kind of helpful courtesy that characterized people who understood the complexity of family logistics during major life transitions. The note's contents had been carefully crafted over several drafts, brief, emotionally neutral, and devastatingly final. Brandon, you said you wanted me to disappear from your life forever. I've decided to grant your wish. The house has been sold. I am traveling extensively and will be unreachable indefinitely. You now have the independence you've always demanded. Robert 40. Words that summarize 28 years of financial support, emotional investment, and accumulated disrespect. No forwarding address, no explanation of timeline, no opportunity for negotiation or emotional manipulation. After the Garcia family settled into their new home, I walked next door to Frank Collins' house with a single suitcase and a request that would position me perfectly for tomorrow's revelation. Frank had been my neighbor for 15 years, a reliable man who helped with snow removal and accepted packages when I traveled for work. Our friendship operated on the comfortable level of mutual respect, without excessive personal intrusion. Can I stay with you for a couple of days, Frank? I'm between living situations. Of course, old friend. What happened with the house? He stepped aside to let me enter his familiar living room, where I'd occasionally shared coffee and neighborhood gossip over the years. I sold it. Time for major changes in my life. His expression showed genuine concern mixed with curiosity. But Frank had always possessed the wisdom to avoid prying into personal matters that weren't offered freely. What about Brandon? Where will he stay when he gets back from wherever he's been? Brandon is an adult. He'll figure out his own arrangements. Something in my tone must have conveyed the finality of that statement, because Frank nodded without pursuing the subject further. His guest room was comfortable and more importantly positioned with a perfect view of my former home's front entrance. That evening, I sat by Frank's window, watching the Garcia family unpack boxes and arrange furniture in rooms where Brandon had spent years taking my generosity for granted. Tomorrow morning he would walk up that driveway expecting to resume his comfortable lifestyle of unemployment subsidized by parental enabling. Instead, he would meet strangers who owned everything he'd assumed would always be available for his use. The engineering precision of this revenge plan satisfied every aspect of my methodical nature. Variables controlled, timelines synchronized, resources allocated efficiently, and desired outcome guaranteed through legal channels that Brandon himself had initiated. Frank knocked on the guest room door around 10 p.m., bringing fresh towels and the kind of practical hospitality that had characterized our entire friendship. Everything you need in here, Robert. Everything's perfect, Frank. Thank you for the accommodation. Stay as long as necessary. Whatever is going on with your family situation, you've got support here. He left me alone with my thoughts and my view of the house where Brandon expected to continue living at my expense. Tomorrow would bring the ultimate lesson in consequences, delivered with the same precision I'd once applied to solving complex engineering problems. The last thing I saw before turning off the lights was Maria Garcia closing the curtains in what had been Brandon's bedroom window. 9:30 arrived with the precision I'd spent 2 weeks orchestrating. From Frank's upstairs window, I watched Brandon round the corner onto our street, walking with the casual confidence of someone returning to familiar territory. He looked exactly as I'd expected after 2 weeks in county jail. Slightly thinner, wearing the same clothes he'd been arrested in, carrying a small plastic bag containing whatever personal items they'd returned to him. His posture showed no trace of humility or reflection, just the eager anticipation of someone ready to resume his comfortable lifestyle. Brandon approached the front walkway without hesitation, pulling out keys that would no longer work in locks that were no longer his to open. The sight of him reaching confidently for a door that belonged to strangers struck me as the perfect metaphor for everything wrong with our relationship. The Garcia children were playing in the front yard while Carlos unloaded boxes from their truck. The sound of unfamiliar voices, speaking Spanish, made Brandon pause, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion as he processed the scene before him. "Excuse me." His voice carried the entitled tone I'd heard countless times when he wanted something from people he considered beneath his attention. "Who are you people? And what are you doing in my house?" Carlos straightened from the moving box he'd been lifting, his expression showing the polite confusion of someone encountering an unexpected situation. "Sorry, friend, but this is our house now. We bought it last week. That's impossible." Brandon's voice rose with the kind of indignation he'd perfected over years of having his reality challenged by inconvenient facts. "I live here. This is my family's home." Maria appeared in the doorway, clearly drawn by the commotion in her front yard. She took in Brandon's agitated state with the practical assessment of a mother who dealt with countless neighborhood disputes and childhood conflicts. "Are you Brandon Davis?" she asked with the careful politeness that characterized her entire approach to this awkward situation. "Yes, finally, someone with sense. Now, please explain why strangers are in my house with all their belongings. The previous owner left something for you." Maria disappeared briefly into the house, returning with the sealed envelope that contained 2 weeks of careful planning, condensed into 40 devastating words. Brandon accepted the envelope with the suspicious reluctance of someone who'd learned to expect bad news from official-looking documents. His fingers trembled slightly as he tore open the seal. The first physical sign that some part of him understood. This moment would change everything. I leaned forward against Frank's window, watching my son's face as he read the note that would complete his education in consequences and gratitude. "Brandon D., you said you wanted me to disappear from your life forever. I've decided to grant your wish. The house has been sold. I am traveling extensively and will be unreachable indefinitely. You now have the independence you've always demanded, Robert." The progression across his features was exactly what I'd anticipated. Confusion, disbelief, growing comprehension, and finally devastating realization. 28 years of financial dependence, emotional manipulation, and casual disrespect had led to this moment, where Brandon finally understood the true cost of taking his father's love and support for granted. "This can't be real." His voice had lost all trace of entitlement, replaced by something approaching panic. "He can't just sell our house and disappear. That's not how families work." "Sir, I'm sorry for your situation," Carlos said with genuine sympathy. "But we have all the legal paperwork. The sale was completed yesterday morning." Brandon's legs seemed to give out slightly, forcing him to lean against the mailbox that no longer belonged to his family. The plastic bag from the jail fell from his grip, spilling his few possessions onto the sidewalk that had once led to his front door. "Where am I supposed to live? How am I supposed to eat?" The questions came out as desperate whispers rather than the demands I'd grown accustomed to hearing. Maria and Carlos exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with witnessing this family crisis, but uncertain how to help someone whose father had deliberately orchestrated his homelessness. From my hidden position, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and unexpected sympathy. The justice was perfect. Brandon had received exactly what he'd claimed to want, but watching his complete emotional collapse stirred something uncomfortably close to paternal concern. He stood there on the sidewalk, reading and rereading the note, as if repetition might change its contents. The house behind him buzzed with the activity of a family who appreciated having a place to call home, while he faced the reality of having nowhere to go. 28 years of enabling had ended with 40 words in a sold house. The lesson in consequences was complete, delivered with the same precision I'd once applied to solving complex engineering problems. Brandon folded the note carefully and walked away without another word to the Garcia family. Hours passed before I could step away from Frank's window. Brandon had disappeared around the corner, but the image of his tears remained burned into my memory like an unexpected photograph. He'd cried. Not the angry, manipulative tears I'd witnessed during childhood tantrums, but genuine heartbroken sobs of someone who'd finally understood the true cost of his choices. For 28 years, I'd wondered if any authentic emotion existed beneath his entitled exterior. The answer had arrived precisely when it no longer mattered. Frank found me in his kitchen that evening, staring at a cup of coffee that had grown cold, while I processed the complex aftermath of successful revenge. "Rough day watching the neighborhood drama?" he asked with the careful tone of someone who suspected more than he was willing to say directly. "Something like that." The young man seemed pretty upset about losing his family home. I met Frank's eyes, seeing the genuine concern of someone who'd witnessed pain without understanding its origins. Sometimes consequences take years to arrive, but they always do eventually. Frank nodded with the wisdom of someone who'd lived long enough to understand that justice rarely arrives on schedule, but rarely fails to arrive at all. "Thank you for the hospitality," I said, rising from the table where I'd spent so many hours planning and plotting. "I'm moving on tomorrow morning." "Where are you headed, Robert?" "To the ocean. Time to start completely fresh." Frank didn't press for details, understanding instinctively that some life changes require privacy rather than explanation. His friendship had provided exactly the support I needed during this transition, without demanding more information than I was willing to share. "You've got my number if you need anything," he offered. Though we both understood this goodbye carried the permanence of someone choosing to leave his entire past behind. The next morning arrived with a kind of California sunshine that makes new beginnings seem not just possible, but inevitable. I loaded my single suitcase into the car. I'd barely driven during 2 weeks of strategic planning, feeling lighter than I had in decades. Frank appeared on his porch as I backed out of his driveway, raising a hand in farewell that carried 30 years of neighborly respect compressed into a single gesture. I waved back, genuinely grateful for his unwitting support. during the most complex moral decision of my life. The highway stretched west toward the Pacific, carrying me away from everything I'd known toward possibilities I hadn't dared imagine 2 weeks ago. 50,000 in my bank account, no family obligations, no one depending on my financial support or emotional availability. Brandon had gotten exactly what he'd claimed to want. Dear father, who disappeared from his life forever. I granted his birthday wish with the same engineering precision I'd once applied to solving complex technical problems. The justice was perfect, delivered through natural consequences rather than malicious revenge. Yet his tears had changed something fundamental in the equation. Not the outcome that remained fixed and appropriate, but my understanding of who he was beneath the entitlement had shifted in those final moments when authentic emotion replaced practiced manipulation. He was still my son despite everything, still capable of genuine feeling, despite years of evidence suggesting otherwise. Still human despite behavior that had often seemed calculatedly cruel. That recognition didn't change my decision to leave, or my conviction that consequences were necessary and appropriate, but it added a layer of complexity to what had started as simple justice and evolved into something approaching wisdom. The coastal highway appeared ahead, promising miles of ocean views and small towns where no one knew my history or expected me to subsidize anyone's lifestyle. Communities where 62 years of accumulated experience might be valued rather than exploited. I'd spent 28 years enabling someone who wished I would disappear. Now I was granting that wish while creating the life I should have built for myself decades ago. The morning sun reflected off my windshield as I drove toward whatever came next, carrying nothing but the clothes in my suitcase and the hard-earned knowledge that respect once lost can only be reclaimed through actions rather than words. Behind me, Brandon was learning the same lesson from the other direction. Ahead, the ocean waited with horizons I'd never explored and possibilities I'd never considered. It was time to find out who I was when no one needed anything from me. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.